Hello, and welcome to Movie Marathon Mood, the show where we watch movies and talk about them. It's as simple as that. And today, we're talking Star Wars as an intense war thriller? That's right, Rogue One. And where does this first theatrical standalone Star Wars story fit in the saga as a whole? Also, we see how it jumps right into A New Hope and talk about the original classic and how its beautiful simplicity is a part of what makes the galaxy far, far away such a special place. We talk about this and more today on Movie Marathon Mood. Stay tuned.
The world is coming undone. Imperial flags reign across the galaxy.
Can you be trusted without your shackles?
Let's just get this over with, shall we?
We've a mission for you. A major weapons test is imminent. We need to know how to destroy it.
If you're really doing this, I want to help.
Good.
Good.
There isn't much time. Every day they grow stronger.
There is a 97.6% chance of failure.
He means well.
This is our chance to make a real difference. Are you with me?
All the way.
Hi everyone, Jesse Gilstrap here again with my pal Drew Cordell. Drew, my friend, part 3 of our Star Wars double features. This time, probably the most obvious of double features now
Yeah,
in the Star Wars movie canon.
yeah,
Made to be a double feature, really.
definitely. Yeah, uh, definitely like meant to bleed right into the next for sure, and in some ways pretty effectively. But yeah, when I first saw Rogue One, I kind of was looking forward to the opportunity to watch it back to back with A New Hope, and um, I've done it before this, obviously, but always kind of a welcome thing to go to one and then jump right into the other.
I think one of the funny things about Rogue One is that a story credit is given to John Knoll,
Right.
which is ideal and obvious, really. And John Knoll is leading folk at Lucasfilm and Industrial Light and Magic, big name over there in that world. And at the same time, the story was the opening crawl of A New Hope. Let's make it a movie,
Yeah.
which certainly is an idea. I just think it's kind of funny. Like, that's my story. But obviously, it is a little bit more than that, too. It's the idea of let's take that and make it an on the ground kind of war tale,
Right.
which is a little bit more specific. But one of those ideas, though, that sprung from that post Revenge of the Sith period, in terms of what they were going to do with Star Wars and things that maybe could have been done on television. And instead, it ended up becoming a big budget movie as part of this new era of Disney owning Lucasfilm. That's a interesting thing that I don't think anybody really knew what to expect. You know, I don't think anybody knew fully what these Star Wars stories were going to entail, even rooted or not in an age before the Disney buy.
Right.
Random trivia note too. It's not explicitly necessary by any means, but if you use Photoshop at all, you'll see John Noah's name when you load Photoshop. Inventor of that highly used program that's so used that it doesn't matter if you use Photoshop specifically or not. It's all Photoshop.
Right. Yeah.
Just synonymous with image editing. But most people actually use Photoshop. It's an interesting thing. Like most people use Kleenex, I think, or
Right.
use Post-it. But Rogue One is a unique animal of a movie that easily could have been done, or I'd like to see it done, where you remove the end credits and remove
Yeah.
the opening crawl from A New Hope and just kind of jump one from the other. And the tonal shift would be quite dramatic, but uh, at the same time, it works story wise to watch these movies together very much.
Right.
But I'll mention this off the bat too about Rogue One. One of the things we didn't know was how it was going to start, because like for a while uh, until Fox was bought out by Disney, uh, a lot of the Star Wars titles besides A New Hope were presented without even the Fox fanfare. And that's become a normal thing for people that love Star Wars. The Fox fanfare going into the Lucasfilm logo, and long time ago in a galaxy far, far away,
Right.
and the music cue. And not even just that, but when you hear the Fox fanfare, it's like the old fashioned Fox fanfare.
Yeah.
It has that sort of graininess and crackliness to it that then blast you into the Star Wars theme when that hits. It has a kind of interesting psychological effect
Right.
of feeling fresh, like that nostalgia kind of the old Fox fanfare going into the high fidelity of the rest of the soundtrack. Um, and it's a dramatic thing that Lucas had to fight for when he first made the original Star Wars movie back in the days when there were still more credits up front. And they're like, you can't start a movie without your traditional credits.
Right.
So he had to pay money to have that on the first Star Wars movie. So then this question came up: how are you going to start these Star Wars stories? And of course, they did the Lucasfilm logo and a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And then Rogue One starts, bam, which always feels jolting to me. I've seen the movie a number of times now, and it still like gets to me. And I'll never forget being at the opening night showing and the audience being like, "Oh, okay." You could just feel like the fan reaction, like, "Oh, okay, we're starting now." Um, I guess that's one way of jumping into it. Uh,
Right.
to me, that's an example of the whole rest of the movie in terms of like the at least the first act, especially feeling disjointed and like they didn't know how to structure this. It felt like they never quite figured. To me, it feels like they never quite figured out how to structure the opening of this movie and the introduction of these characters and jumping from planet to planet. I'm curious how you feel about that aspect, Drew.
It's kind of hard for me to talk about exactly where I was at the point of Rogue One coming out, because I don't really want to give away all my review or feelings about Force Awakens too much until we actually talk about it.
It's coming.
But I just wasn't really happy with that movie, and at the time that kind of bummed me out. And so I didn't really, and so I didn't really know how to feel about Star Wars going forward, what it was going to be, what, if I was going to continue to be disappointed. And really the storyline of Rogue One was something that had actually been done. I mean, not the way they do it in Rogue One, but the stealing the Death Star plans. Aside from it being in the crawl, they had actually tackled that in the video game Dark Forces with the character Kyle Katarn, who was a very popular character. And I I was just kind of jaded at that point. Thought, well, this, if this is the best they're going to do with one of these standalones, I'm not really too excited about what they're going to bring in. So I went in with very low expectations. I do agree that the opening is very jarring because it almost feels, and I was sitting here trying to find confirmation because I feel like that I had heard or read that they had actually done an opening crawl, uh, or at least were planning on doing one. I don't know for sure because I don't want to speak out of turn and say they did when I don't know for sure if they did or not. But it really does feel like you just skipped the opening crawl and went straight into the movie, um, with that musical note kind of just hitting, and here we are. Um, it really did feel like that would be what came right after, when the camera finally starts tilting down. That would be what we would see next. But instead, we just go straight into it, and the music hits. Um, and I think it was definitely jarring for me. Definitely kept me interested, though. It was very different.
Sure. Yeah.
And I agree. I don't really know how I feel about it, and I don't disagree that the opening act of this movie kind of feels a little disjointed in a lot of ways. But there's also some very strong things that they have going that really kind of keep you engaged too. So it's not completely a mixed bag,
Oh,
but it definitely is kind of an awkward opening because you have for the first time we have like a time jump in Star Wars. All these movies take place in a moment of time, and you don't um, get flashbacks for the most part, or really at all, other than maybe premonitions of the future or something like that. But you don't. This isn't kind of movie. This isn't a Tarantino movie or a series. There's not a whole bunch of stuff out of sequence. These are pretty linear films. So this is the first real time we kind of start out at a point in time. Of course, we saw that in Solo, um, but like in terms of release, this was the first time we really kind of seen this. And you have young Jen Urso, and we meet Galen Urso, who's Mads Mikkelsen, of course, just a wonderful, wonderful actor. One of the best out there right now. His character is pretty important uh, to the story in this, but he's not in the movie a significant a lot of time. Then we have director Krennic introduced, and Ben Mendelsohn, another terrific actor, and I do kind of like his character in this movie. I do have a few nitpicks and complaints about kind of what his character is to the story, and maybe some things that could be done better or differently. But I do think his performance is fantastic, and I really do enjoy him in this movie. I like this opening. In a way, I do really like the opening because it sets up a kind of tone of dread, which is also not something that you get in Star Wars, or not, really. No, you even in Revenge of the Sith, which we talked about, like you knew things were going to happen, and bad things did happen, but it never kind of stopped, never dug too deep into the dread of it all. It was still a Star Wars movie at the end of the day, and kept that brisk pace. But this feels pretty desperate and intense for most of the runtime, going from the opening to what happens to Jen's mother, and of course we got the Death Troopers, who are just really cool, have really awesome suits. What makes them different from regular stormtroopers in this movie? Nothing really. They just have cooler costumes, and they're supposed to be a little more special ops, I guess, but like ultimately they don't really do anything too crazy different than stormtroopers.
Just ever slightly deepening the sense of different ranks of the empire.
Right, right. I think this is their definitely the most disjointed part. Uh, is the introduction of Saw Gerrera, who originated from the Clone Wars, of course, animated series, and we get to see him played by Forrest Whitaker. Which, did you ever think you were going to see Forrest Whitaker in a Star Wars movie? That's kind of been the fun thing about these this new era of Star Wars, is maybe getting to see people that you would never have thought you would get to see in a Star Wars movie, like Benicio del Toro, for one. But that I was kind of interested to see what Forrest Whitaker was going to bring, and I'm still interested when I see his performance in this, because it's very jarring. It's I don't dislike it, but it's a bizarre take on the character, I think. And I do think that this movie kind of gets a little off track with the Jeddah stuff, even though there are things about the Jeddah stuff that I think are awesome and great. But there's just some weird stuff going on with Saw Gerrera, and it's interesting, and I'm definitely captivated when I see it, but I don't know that it's really fits. That it could be done differently. I don't know. It's and we seesaw. We we witness Saw uh, taking in Jen, but we never like get the real sense of them being close. I don't think. And even though we're supposed to believe that they are, I it's kind of an awkward thing to just pick up and run with. I think I want to mention Felicity Jones. I've been talking about Jen, but I do like her in this role. I think she does a really good job with what she's given. I do think that if I do have a major complaint about Rogue One, is that her character is not necessarily the most consistently written. And I think they're not that they're things that she does are dumb or like completely out of character or anything like that. But I feel like at some point she's a very strongly written character. She's got great motivation. She's got a lot at stake in this. But then there's other points in the story where it's things that are kind of thin and the threads start to, you know, trickle down a little bit. It's not as well written, and that's probably my chief complaint. And I do feel that she does a great job again with what she's given, but there's some things that fall a little flat. And we've actually talked about this before, but I think the scene where she sees the hologram of her father, I right before Jedda's destroyed, I think I think that scene kind of falls a little flat. It's supposed to be a little bit more dramatic and emotional, and it kind of feels out of place because to me this movie is really kind of a Dirty Dozen type war movie. That's the way I kind of view it as a whole. It's it's a World War II movie in Star Wars, essentially. I don't think I've heard some people try to call this a heist movie. I don't really think it is at all, even though they are stealing the Death Star plans or attempting to, but it's not structured like that in any shape or fashion. It's not set up like a heist movie. You don't have kind of this huge scene where they're planning out every aspect of how they're going to get in, do this, do that. It's kind of just on the fly. I mean, yeah, they kind of go, oh, we're going to do this, this, and this, but they don't. It's not, it's just a brief thing. It's not, it hasn't all been built up like this. Them still in Death Star plans is just kind of something that comes about because they discover what's going on with her father's work on the Death Star and all this. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is, to me, this is very much a war film, and I'm more willing to forgive certain things, like certain characters not having, uh, not learning everything about certain characters because we're kind of on the go. We're going into this battle um, as things go along in terms of some of these cast of characters like um, Chirrut and Donnie Yen, who's absolutely awesome, and Baze Malbus, played by Jing Wen, who's also awesome. Um, I think there could be more to their characters specifically, and I think that Riz Ahmed is also really good. He plays that Imperial pilot that's kind of the key to all this. Um, Him defecting between him and Galen Erso, like they're kind of the key to learning about the Death Star plans and this whole plot moving forward. But I think there could be more to all of those guys. Um, but I'm willing to forgive it a little bit because they, we're caught up in the moment of this war. Things are intense. We're moving forward, and they get right in the thick of the action. And I'm pretty invested in the characters' fates by the end. I do think that they could be a little more fleshed out. I've seen a lot of people. That's been a lot of people's complaints is the characters, and I actually connect with them a little bit. But I do wish I knew a little more. The character that I think definitely is not underdeveloped is Cassian Andor, and I just kind of want to talk about that opening with him which again, I guess it also kind of feels disjointed too. But I really like that opening of the introduction of his character, where he's trying, learning about defected pilot, learning about the plans. It's kind of a intense spy thriller kind of scene, and kind of paints the alliance in maybe not the most positive light when he ends up having to kill the guy, and everything that happens. I really like that edge, and I love the speech that he gives, like after Galen Urso dies, when he was actually like given orders to take him out, and he struggles with it because he's become close to Jen. He ends up not doing it, but she finds out, and this is kind of like, again, this give and take, because I feel like she's on. It's almost kind of weird for her, her being angry there. It doesn't really hit right to me, that scene. It's a weird thing, but his reaction is perfect. I love that bit of character he has there in that speech, and I think it definitely kind of sells him as this character that really has had to struggle his whole life and has been 100% invested in this rebellion, and we'll see we'll see it through any means necessary. And then, of course, K2SO, his droid, voiced by Alan Tudyk, just, man, probably one of the best droid characters of the whole series. I'm hesitant to say the best, because you can't discount R2D2. I mean, you really can't. Um, but and there are other droids as well, that have been great in the series, but K2SO is just so cool and smug, and has his little personality, and Alan Tudyk is just he's a wonderful actor, but like a voice actor, he's just immensely talented, um, and he does such a good job with that in this as well. But I feel really connected to those two specifically. The one thing I'm not really willing to forgive in this kind of war movie setting is that when you throw in this stuff like the Galen or so hologram, or have like the more serious type of moments for Jen, like confronting Cassian about trying to assassinate her father, like those things, they don't really hit home as hard as they should, and they're not. I kind of feels like they're almost tacked on to add emotion, but they don't. And I think those things should have been developed a little bit better. And I'm not going to get too far. I know I've already talked about so much, because there's a lot in this movie to unpack. But to kind of go back to that mindset I was in when I saw it, this movie kind of had to win me over, because I was already, I already had low expectations, and but it had me interested as it went on, and I definitely think that first act I was kind of like on the fence, because it was very much a back and forth, disjointed first act. I do agree with you that it almost feels like they didn't know how to get it started. It's almost like, even with that scene where we get caught up with Jen and she's like imprisoned, it just kind of, oh, what? Where are we now? It jumps all over the place without, you know, establishing a rhythm. So, But by the time we kind of get to the destruction of Jeddah, the movie was starting to click for me after that, especially when they get to the planet with Galen or so. He's on, and the second act was better and definitely more fluid. But the third act, I mean, oh my gosh, you know, the talk about like starting off a little iffy and ending on a strong note. This movie is definitely backloaded. It's got the goods at the end, and I think that was why I rode on such a high from this movie, because it just delivered on the ending so well that it was just hard not to be completely you know enthralled. And it was just a very weird experience for me. My wife actually noted that I was breathing heavily when we saw it. She could tell I was really into it, really invested in it. Especially like toward the end, not knowing where the things were going to go. Uh, exactly, precisely. So this movie is definitely different Star Wars experience for sure.
Well, I'll specifically reference Diego Luna, as you mentioned Andor, and I really like Diego Luna an awful lot. Really big fan of Y Tu Mama Tambien, and really uncertain what on earth this new series is going to be on Disney Plus
Yeah,
following him. But I guess we'll find out what that story is, because boy, that could be a dark story.
right.
I I'm curious to find out what that means, because based on how we saw him at the beginning of this movie, that could be a lot of dark things,
Yeah,
uh, and obviously plenty of ground to uncover. Yeah, his character is pretty consistent and strong throughout, in terms of in Rogue One itself seeing probably enough to understand him
yeah,
in his emotional space. I still think there could have been room to handle him just a little bit more, but I basically get it. Jen is another story,
right,
um, where I can appreciate her emotional reaction, and Felicity Jones is a good actor, but I don't feel like we get a sense of it in the story. Like the story at some points is this harder edged uh, thriller action kind of thing,
right,
but then it also wants to live in that emotional space too. But if we don't pause for emotional character moments or to develop those scenes, then you don't let that emotion work.
right,
So it's a real problem at the beginning of this movie, and I in a weird way, am frustrated at how much I love the final act,
right.
because the final act is so good that you can almost forget everything else that came before. It's the final act is pretty much perfect,
Yeah,
uh, and in every way. The action is some of the best action in all of Star Wars. But to make that really sing, though, is that it works on an emotional level.
right,
You feel the propulsion of, okay, now let's do this. Let's save the rebellion. Let's get these Death Star plans, because this is hope that we can actually do something to stop the Empire. Because the rebellion has been a lot more scattered up to that point. Obviously, they have organization, but this is actually a big, bold move that obviously moves us into A New Hope. But it becomes this important emotional moment for the rebellion, and you kind of feel that in all the characters and their kind of desperation,
Right.
born with hope. But the problem for me is that, man, that ending could work even better if you cared about the characters before you got to that point.
Yeah.
And it almost works in spite of itself. That last part, I can buy into the characters and I understand what they're feeling and what they're going through, but yeah, I'd like to have that have been developed from the beginning. Not to be too repetitive about what you were talking about, but that whole hologram sequence is one of those where I understand why she'd be emotional seeing her dad, and that can work and make sense in a certain sense of it. But she's so emotional, and we're not. Maybe somebody is out there, but like, we haven't had a chance to experience what she's gone through. We haven't experienced her isolation,
Right.
or to know what headspace she's in. The movie has been like spiraling us to this point. Like, oh, and she's being rescued from prison, and then she's taken off to the Jeddah, and and there she is, and she's seen a hologram of her dad. But like, where is she emotionally? The movie isn't pausing to let us get a sense of her journey and where she's been this whole time.
Right.
So that's a missing aspect of her emotional reality, and therefore ours, since she's the central character. But even outside of her, like, I wish we could have seen more of the other characters as well. Even though I like them conceptually, I think conceptually a lot of this works. It's never a bad movie. It always has parts that I enjoy and details that I enjoy from front to back. And the action is always good. The action is always terrific in this movie. It just happens that the final act also emotionally connects, as well as having incredible action. But man, that final act, the final act basically is the movie, and the space battle is out of this world incredible. Putting us right back into that headspace of the space battles in the original Star Wars, which obviously we're talking about right after this. But like, it was a nostalgic kick to have those pilots pop in, and like all the rest of the rebellions come in to help them, and then on top of that, to have those star destroyers crashing into each other, and the utter insanity out in space. But then on the ground, that action is also terrific. The AT-ATs, as that they are specifically said out loud as in this movie. Whether you question AT-ATs or AT-ATs, they say AT-AT in this movie. But then what does that make an ATST? It said an ATIST. I don't know. I guess that's a little more questionable. But yeah, the action on the ground is also incredible, and obviously a lot more intimate. Not just following the main characters that we followed, but in terms of existing in tighter spaces and blaster fights, and you also get a great sense of each character having something to do and how down to the wire everything is. If you want to nitpick, I guess you can nitpick about, you need to find a switch. Where is it? It's standing there in the middle of the.
Right.
I mean, you could definitely nitpick things, but I at the same time, I think it works in the space of the movie itself, and that whole sequence of getting the switch is so well executed. I almost forget that I don't have enough of an emotional connection to the character before that. That's kind of the way this movie operates. That's to some degree, but I have a strong appreciation when you have a cast of characters and you actually give them plot driven moments, and that's a large part of what this finale does is it gives everybody something to do. That's important to give people a sense of import, uh, and not have anybody just standing by too much. Everybody's got something to do, and they are scrambling. They are absolutely scrambling in the end, all the way to the point that they're all gone, and they're still scrambling.
Right.
That's how desperate everything is. But I mean, the truth is, like, one of the big things people talk about with this movie is after the main characters are already gone, and you get that Darth Vader hallway scene, which is amazing, and and just the crazy cool thing to see lived out as much as it is. And we've already talked about the Mandalorian and the like father, like son
Yeah.
connection when Luke shows up at the end of season 2 of the Mandalorian. Uh, it's cool to see that mirror. But I even though I agree that sequence is incredible in this movie, to see Vader just unleashed
Right.
like that, and then when you see him walk out in A New Hope, and you have just seen that sequence in Rogue One, it kind of adds this extra intensity too.
Right.
No, this guy's pissed,
Yeah.
he's ready to kill everybody. But at the same time, I only push back on that and highlighting that sequence because it's such a small part of what makes the finale amazing to me.
Right.
Uh, that's my only pushback. Like, I get it. I get why people love it so much, but I also think if that's the one best part about Rogue One, then Rogue One's not a good movie.
Right.
And I don't think that's true. I think it's a movie with a lot of problems up front structurally, but has a lot of interesting notes too. Has a lot of interesting details. Puts us in a unique space in the Star Wars universe in terms of the state of the rebellion. Creates this interesting cast of characters, and then has this incredible finale that where everything clicks and we understand what everybody's after.
Right.
That matters a whole lot. I wish we got more with Jeddah
Yeah.
because that's a cool place to be.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, cool. That's really awesome to see Jeddah and those statues like toppled over and stuff. Like the production design and everything is awesome, but they do absolutely nothing with it and why we're there and what that means. They just kind of like barrel through it. And Saul Guerrero is an interesting character, but they don't do anything to let us understand who he is really or his connection with Jin. The fact that he's connected at all seems superfluous because we never get to live that connection out at all, which only vaguely works because Jin herself is like, you kind of dumped me. So I guess in a weird way, like, yeah, this guy's a nutty war character, disconnected from his own Clone Wars appearance too. Like he's gone through a lot more. Not to say he's not couldn't be the same character because he is, quite literally is, but also you can imagine how he get in that space. But it's not like the Saw Gerrera of Rogue One looks exactly like the one in Clone Wars. But I just wish we got to develop the first part of this movie better. That's ultimately what the problem comes down to. And what really makes me curious too is that this is a movie that Gareth Edwards is credited as a director on, but the movie was apparently taken away from him. And I think the part that they worked on was the ending. I'm not sure what all they did, what all they might have changed or not changed, but it's my understanding that the ending is one of the biggest things that they worked on in reshoots. So I'm really curious what precisely they all changed, but also just maybe they should have worked on more. I don't know. Like, that's a funny thing. Uh, Getting all their ducks in a row to begin with. Because obviously we talked about Solo and how that was originally not a Ron Howard movie, but they took it out of the original director's hands after they'd done a whole lot of work, but still at enough time that Ron Howard did the bulk of it and could be the solo credit the director. Whereas Gareth Edwards mostly made this movie. He directed most of it, and they might have taken it out of his hands, but he's the credited director because he did the bulk of it. And nobody else did enough to be credited as a director. But because they took it away from him, I don't know what exactly that means in terms of having a vision for this story and what they wanted to do with it and what exactly was changed. Because I just get the impression that something wasn't working and they changed it all up. And maybe when they changed it, they gave it the best part. They made the best part of the movie the ending. And I guess it worked. The movie made a ton of money and it's some people's favorite now. I've seen people jump up and say that this was their favorite Star Wars at this point, which I do not remotely agree with, but it's still strong. And I still appreciate this movie for what it is too. And I also think it's cool to have, even though I pick on that first musical note, I like Michael Giacchino a whole lot. So having him score this movie works a lot, I think.
Yeah, I think Giacchino does a really good job. It's really interesting because, this is the first live action Star Wars that doesn't have a John Williams score. And of course, we definitely hear some themes that are very familiar and jump in here and there. So the John Williams DNA is all over the place. But I think Giacchino's score is really good, but I don't think it is quite maybe as good as it could be because it doesn't get to because you almost have to follow that John Williams DNA that it never really kind of has its own identity. That's like one of my other slight problems with Rogue One, which when I left the theater, um, I was very high on Rogue One. Not to the point where I would say it was my favorite Star Wars movie because I've never quite gotten that carried away with it. But I definitely like it, and I still like it probably the best out of anything that's been released from Disney since they took over Lucasfilm and everything. I still think it's probably my favorite of those. But as I've watched it more, especially on this rewatch, there have been things that have kind of jumped out to me more as negatives, and that's one thing. Like this film does have a lot of things that give it its own identity, but the score isn't necessarily one of them. I think there are some decent themes, like Krennic kind of has a theme going a little bit. We have we have some good bits, especially in the finale. I mean, talking about that whole sequence, the Battle of Scarif is just, I mean, as you said, it is up to par with the original trilogy stuff. I really agree with that. But as somebody that's been clamoring just for a good space battle, But because even Revenge of the Sith, I talked about how much I love that opening sequence. Never quite got a great space battle like the Battle of Yavin or Endor in the prequels. Um, Although there might be a Phantom Menace fan out there that thinks Jake Lloyd spinning, because that's a good trick, is the greatest space scene in the whole series. I don't know, but I think the general thoughts on that are, the space battles and the prequels weren't necessarily the best or really abundant either. And I don't want to talk about Force Awakens too much until we get to it. But personally, I wasn't really that crazy about the space battle in it. So to get Scarif and it just be what it is, because I didn't know anything. I think I saw it the week after it came out. I didn't see it opening weekend, but I saw it like the week after it came out. So I didn't. I had done my best to stay spoiler free. I knew Vader was in it. I did not know about the hallway sequence, but I did know Vader was in it. But at that point, it wasn't a secret. It was on trailers. It was on promotional images that Vader was going to be in the movie. The ending or the battle itself, I like that it's kind of we're we're with it to the last man or woman in this case, where we're systematically watching all these characters, as you say, in some cases like that we're just now starting to care for, get systematically executed one by one. Uh, like this, the don't get used to that, because this could be probably the only Star Wars movie we get where all the main characters die. It's interesting in that way that you know, and the thing to point out though, it doesn't ever get tonally overbearing. I don't think it's quote unquote depressing. I think one of my friends like just thought it was nihilistic, and I don't think it's nihilistic at all. Um, I think it's a sacrifice for something better, and I think I'm a huge. So we're both war movie fans, and I think that it executes on that pretty well. That's why I characterize this as like the war Star Wars movie that's actually a war movie, especially Scarif. But the Scarif is just I don't know, like it would be weird to just start breaking down a list of my favorite battles in Star Wars, but Scarif would be close to the top, because it's just on every aspect when it comes to what's going on with the main characters on the inside. Um, Jen and Cassian kind of trying to get the plans, K2SO, you know, holding off stormtroopers and eventually getting destroyed. Um, Krennic kind of catching up with them, and then that showdown at the top. It's all intense and it's all very well done. Then you have that space battle, and wow, it's just so cool. And Blue Leader. I don't know what that character's name off the top of my head, but he's Blue Leader. He's cool. He's really cool, and I um, like them, getting through the shield, um, and getting down to the planet, and then kind of providing air support. And I think one of the coolest sequences, or one of the coolest moments, is actually when he gets shot down. And then it just kind of seamlessly, we go to the Chirrut and Baze's point of view, seeing his X-wing like blow up in the background. It's really a really cool moment, like change of perspective. The ground battle, like you said, it's intense, and I really like the setting of Scarif, like a tropical type setting. And you talk about the ending being what they worked on and what they changed, and and I don't think anybody really knows what the story exactly is of what happened at the end, when they had to do reshoots, um, why they chose to. But we all know that there were multiple shots in the trailers that were not in the final film. And one of them was Krennic walking like along the shoreline, like dead troopers everywhere. I always thought that was a cool shot. I wondered, like, where is that? Why isn't that in this movie? That was one of those things. I I think, talk about my problems with Krennic. One of the things that I like in Star Wars, and especially like we're going to talk about New Hope here in a minute, but I like kind of the bureaucracy of the military officers. And so I'm interested like in those type of characters. I'm interested to see more of them, but I feel like he's a little one note. It's just he's got this Death Star project. He's trying to get, credit, be noticed by the Emperor, and all that, and to the point where he goes and visits Vader on Mustafar, which is cool to see Mustafar and see his fortress there and all that. I really like that part, and if the Vader hallway scene didn't happen, I would have been satisfied with Vader in the movie, because I enjoyed like this sequence, and then just the fact that his Star Destroyer even showed up at the end was cool. The hallway was just a bonus. Like Krennic's like trying to muscle Vader. Like I don't. It's like he can't be that stupid. Like he's trying to weasel his way around. The guy that wiped out all the Jedi. Someone who is very intimidating. Someone who is in that costume, in that suit. It's just something I don't know. I uh, I don't buy it. I don't understand why he's there, other than because Vader demanded he be there. But like, I don't understand what he's trying to do there. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. I wish Krennic would have been, other than Vader force choking him and making that line, "Don't choke on your aspirations," which I can never decide if I love or hate that. But I don't know. Like Krennic kind of feels like a missed opportunity in a lot of ways, because I think he could have been like a standout villain, but he doesn't ever quite get there. That leads me to Tarkin, and this has kind of been a controversial thing, because when you bring him back actors that have passed away with digital representation, I think it's just a weird thing. Like I'm not completely opposed to the idea of it, and I'm not, if it's done effectively. I think that ultimately that uncanny valley, we didn't really get there. We didn't really get to the point that this really looks realistic enough to be a person. And he's a digital character. Why? Why was that so important? I think that Tarkin, the presence in this, which is necessary because he was ultimately in charge of the Death Star in A New Hope, and if you're going directly into that and you're going to have the Death Star, you have to have Tarkin in it. But I feel like they could have done a better job in they less is more. If they had him just kind of looking out the window and maybe all you see is reflection, and then like you see him with his back turned at the end ordering the Death Star to the fire, and those are the only times you see Tarkin. I think that would have been very effective and worked. And those scenes are good. But like when he steps into full frame, it just kind of takes you out of it. And I don't necessarily think Princess Leia is as tacky. Um, that one, it's also so brief that that one doesn't bother me as much. People got varying opinions on it. It doesn't ruin the movie for me at all. Did we really need it? No, I don't think so. I think they could have definitely pulled back the reins on that. I do wonder what happened with Gareth Edwards. Like what exactly what decision made them decide? What brought them to the decision to put Tony Gilroy in and to do the reshoots. I don't know. I think he did a good job, but we kind of have to wonder like what at the end, like what he did and what Gilroy ultimately did. And know that Gilroy definitely did the Vader thing because that was definitely added. Touching on that, I think the Vader sequence definitely is, what people remember. It's what people talk about. And I agree with you. Like, Scarif as a whole deserves better than to just be talked about for that sequence because the Battle of Scarif is just so good. I think it's discredit to it to say that the Vader scene is the only good part. But is it excellent? Is it terrifying? Is it effective? Absolutely. And again, like not knowing that that was coming, it was absolutely thrilling to see in the theater. And it's still thrilling to watch now. Ultimately, I think Rogue One is going to fall an A minus for me because it soars so high, but it also has like those problems. And I think the high notes outweigh the low, but not so much that it can maintain a solid A or A plus. Like, because to me, Scarif, that whole final section, that's A plus. But you can't just judge a movie by its best part. You got to judge it as a whole. I think if I would have, if we would have been doing this right after it came out, I probably would have gave it a solid A. But just like kind of growing a little bit and kind of looking at it and being able to pick apart the flaws, I definitely going to give this an A minus now.
I pick up on Tarkin a little bit because and bleed over just a little into A New Hope by saying that Peter Cushing is amazing.
Yes.
So that's my first comment on A New Hope, is to say that Peter Cushing is absolutely fantastic and underrated in A New Hope.
Yeah.
In terms of so much is spent on Vader and his presence, and I think Tarkin is right there toe to toe, an important villainous presence. Yes, he needed to be somewhere in Rogue One based on what the story is, but it, it, it should have been less. It's cool as an effects reel. Like, oh, look at what how far we've come in terms of digital recreation. It's pretty impressive as just an effects representation. Part of my problem is the same thing that Spielberg always talked about with like Jurassic Park and other movies that he's made, because he's made so many great visual effects movies. One of the best directors with visual effects. And Spielberg is always insistent that the camera is going to move. The camera is going to move like it would move if it wasn't digital. If it wasn't an effect, we're just going to move the camera accordingly.
Right.
to the action and to how it needs to be for the movie. And we need to make the effect work with that. And because so often there are a lot of times when cameras lock down for effect shots because it's easier to accomplish, obviously. But
Right.
for whatever reason in Rogue One, they put Tarkin like front and center, and he's one of the best lit characters in the entire movie.
Yeah.
For a movie that's very gritty and raw and shadowy, it's got a cool look to it. This movie overall, I actually really dig the aesthetic throughout the entire thing. It's a good looking movie, but the effect shots jump out. Specifically Tarkin shots. And even Leia at the end, like I'll pick on that because they could have done that differently than having her like right in front of the camera.
Yeah,
In an extreme close, like Hope. Like right, like man, you could have backed off just a little, I don't know, or just from an
Right.
angle even. We would have understood it. Like I feel like if there was a person there, it wouldn't have shot it the same way. You know, like if they were just shooting it to shoot it and not thinking of it as an effect.
Right.
Or as a moment, they could have done it differently. Tarkin is obviously the bigger part here that's just ever present and frustrating to me. Because I don't mind him as a character, really, but I'm so distracted by the effect that doesn't pass muster. And I'm usually not bothered by effects that same way. I'm usually relatively forgiving in terms of just enjoy the story for what it is and so forth, you know, just let the movie win you over. Some people, they get the pick on effects just because they can notice it's an effect.
Right.
Especially if it's an older effect. I can tell that's an old effect. Therefore, it's laughable. And it's like, that's not really fair. Because I can tell the effects in the Avengers movies are effects. And they can bother me. But I don't know. It's telling that something is modern or not modern is not the tell of a good effect or a bad effect. I'm hesitant to call Tarkin a bad effect, but it's certainly not what it needed to be and not executed right.
Yeah. I think used improperly is probably the best way to phrase it. That it's just not executed properly. They didn't do the right thing with it.
And it's a few years removed, but when they did Luke and a Mandalorian, I didn't mind it.
Yeah.
But it was much more minimal, obviously, and but also just kind of fit into the emotional space of that part of the story.
Right.
Yeah, it's all about just how you handle it, and yeah, Rogue One, it's one of the parts that bugs me the most. But regardless of which, I give it an A minus. I honestly think if I'm being picky, I like Solo better. But that's just being, I don't know, finicky. Which one? Because I think Solo's more consistent and I guess more my style slightly, but they're both fit right in the A minus category too. Definitely two good Star Wars stories, though.
Yeah.
In terms of, I don't know, what could have been and what is, that these are good stories, but even if we wish that they would explore broader territory too in a Star Wars universe, and hopefully they will. They definitely have certain plans laid out to cover different ground, but I guess we'll have to see what they actually do beyond with more Star Wars stories, different movie series that are upcoming, and television series, of course, too.
Right.
See how far beyond we can actually explore. But Rogue One moves us straight into A New Hope.
From the moment he saw her image,
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
She's beautiful.
he had to find her.
I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you.
Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia. In danger, in love, in Star Wars. No legendary adventure of the past could be as exciting as this romance of the future. Star Wars. Rated PG. Now playing at a theater near you.
The original Star Wars, which we call A New Hope
Right.
to distinguish it now more than anything. But for the longest time, it was Star Wars, which a lot of people have also talked about is a low-budget movie, which isn't quite true.
No.
It's not a low-budget movie. It's just a mid-tier kind of movie in terms of budget. It had a good budget. The difference is that they were doing a whole lot of effects without necessarily the resources to pull them off.
Yeah.
They were reinventing the wheel without the biggest backing. They were doing it in a friggin' garage, you know,
Right.
and changing effects forever. So talking about how to do visual effects right, the original Star Wars is one of the best visual effects movies of all time.
Yeah.
Having said that, I am still frustrated. I don't have any problem with the special editions existing. I think that's fine. But why can't we have the original theatrical releases?
Right.
Because if you watch the movies on Disney Plus, as I have been doing, what you get is, of course, the latest special versions, which includes even newer things in some places.
Right.
Slight additions that I think were done when they made the 3D versions of the movies that never came out.
Yeah.
Phantom Menace is the only one that was officially released, and then they showed Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith at Celebration some years ago. I think in London. And there was a tiny part of me that's like, I don't know how I can afford this, but
You're right.
I want to go see those movies in 3D. I saw Phantom Menace. I thought that was really cool. But they did these new versions, and I think overseen by Lucas is in terms of all these new slight touches. But some of the digital effects come from 1997.
Yeah.
And they stand out.
Yeah.
As being 1997 visual effects shots. And I mentioned this back on Phantom Menace, but when they added the digital Yoda into Phantom Menace, it's not terrible, but it's at the same time the nature of adding effects in. And later, if you're going to do it right, then ideally you do it as part of the original production, obviously, but if you're not, then you still devote a lot of time to it. But with these additional effects, they're not devoting their full time and resources to them.
Right.
And they didn't with the special editions either. They were just kind of like, oh, here's a modern effect, and we're going to toss that in there. And like some little touches are okay, but yeah, that's just a slight thing that bothers me. And it's worth bringing up because if people were watching it on Disney Plus, which is probably how most people are going to watch it now.
Yeah.
I wish they were watching the original versions and not judging the 1977 Star Wars on the special editions.
Right.
I wish they were actually seeing what originally happened in 1977. Look at the old CG effect in the Star Wars. And no, that was 20 years after Star Wars that they added that in. What? It gets kind of confusing if you don't know that history.
Right.
And I don't know if everybody's going to be doing research before they watch a movie. But the thing that maybe bothers me the most is that they re-edited this movie too. And it's very subtle in terms of the changes, some of the changes they made, but the original edit is a better movie too.
Right.
So definitely don't hate the special edition, but I also think it's worth pointing out that, especially in terms of like the editing is one of the things that saves Star Wars. The editing is one of the most talked about parts about what made Star Wars what it is. Um, and I'm not saying the movie wouldn't have worked.
Right.
Uh, Otherwise, yeah, it's hard to say for sure. What would the movie have been had it had a different editor, or what would they have eventually figured out? Alternate histories are always impossible to completely justify one way or the other because you're talking about a multitude of different factors. But I do think that the editing in the original Star Wars is absolutely top flight, and one of the reasons it works as well as it does, and that's credit to Paul Hirsch specifically. Not the only editor credited on the movie, but Paul Hirsch is absolutely legend, one of the best out there, and one of the big reasons the original Star Wars clicked into place. Hesitant to keep taking off. Uh, what do you have to say, Drew, so far?
I think that one thing that I am going to discuss as we continue through the original trilogy is that in different points of my life, I've had one of these picked as my favorite. Like as a younger person, and this isn't like to say that I only liked this because I was a child. This was just my favorite then. And it was Return of the Jedi. And it was because it was so appealing to me as a child that it was definitely my favorite one to watch over and over and over again. I watched all three of them over and over and over again, but it was definitely my favorite to watch of the three because I had so much fun with it. But as I got older, I saw the appeal of Empire, and we'll talk about both of these movies next episode. I'm not going to waste too much time talking about them now, but Empire is generally the most, when someone's asked what's the best Star Wars movie, Empire is probably going to be the the most common answer. And for good reason. I think Empire is a great movie, and for a long time it was my favorite too. And I think like all three of these movies kind of on an equal plane. Like it may change again, but I'm at a point in my life now and have been for several years that I've really appreciated just the pure storytelling of the original Star Wars. And I think just like as an experience, as a film, it delivers on every note. And the editing, of course, is definitely like a selling point because especially the way that you know I'm going to assume everybody's seen this movie that's listening to this. You may have not seen the other one, you probably had, but like I'm going to assume that if you're listening to this, you've probably seen A New Hope 100 times. So we're not going to go down the rabbit hole of talking about every part chronologically. But when you get to the Battle of Yavin and you got the Death Star trench and going back and forth, the editing, it's just so flawless, and coupled with John Williams' score. And I knew I was going to regret saying Phantom Menace was the best Star Wars score because I already retract that statement. I think, and I think really, again, this is probably going to be a toss up between these three, but I think just as a pure orchestral masterpiece, A New Hope is probably the best because John Williams conducted and composed the hell out of this. And when you hear the, you know, I think the standout piece is, the Force theme itself, of course, like when Luke is looking at the twin suns on Tatooine. That shot is just fantastic and iconic and beautiful, and echoes of the Searchers in the opening, like the beginnings of this movie. But with that music, it just cements it into your mind forever. But at the end with the Death Star, the frantic nature of that whole ending is what puts it over the top, because the editing is just so fast paced. Story wise, the narrative structure of it, that you have like this ticking clock and you have to get this done in a certain amount of time, or you know the battle's lost, planet's destroyed. Luke's desperation, Obi-Wan like reaching out to Luke from beyond, all those moments coupled with John Williams' score, which is just amazing, makes this movie so special. And I love that this movie kind of comes down to a lot of classic tropes, but they are done in such a smart way. And Lucas knew what he was doing. Now, I think that it's become popular to kind of detract Lucas as a director. And I think even he would, because he has done so in uh, audio commentaries and stuff, that he preferred other people to be directing the films. I guess that changed a little bit when he did the prequels, but I just think that it's become popular to say, I'm not, I do definitely don't think that's what you said, but a lot of people will take what they've heard about the editing saved the movie and say, well, Lucas didn't even make a good movie. His wife just edited it that way. Or something absurd like that they heard in a, they heard like Red Letter Media or somebody say, which is just really dumb. Because this movie, of course, is somebody that was in it over their head. Lucas. This movie was too big for him. I think it was definitely a lot of pressure uh, riding on him with this. But the storytelling is so pure. Like Luke is just like the ultimate, classic chosen hero character, and we go on that the hero's journey with him, and this is just done in such a beautiful way. Obi-Wan is that mentor, and Alec Guinness, and I'm not breezing over Mark Hamill. I'm going to talk about him in a minute, but Alec Guinness, just the best one of the best actors ever. But I love him in like some David Lean films, especially. Liked him in Lawrence of Arabia, but love him in Bridge over River Kwai, which he has a bigger role in anyway. Uh, Fantastic movie, but he does a great job in this because he's very professional. It would have been easy for like a actor like him to kind of turn his nose up at Star Wars, because it's at the time in '77, the like sci-fi wasn't exactly in, and to see like Lucas, kind of a new kid on the block, he's made American Graffiti, THX 1138, but nothing to really make you think that this Star Wars movie is going to be what it ultimately is. But Alec Guinness does such a good job of treating it with respect and giving a great performance. And Obi-Wan is just a fantastic like mentor character. And that connection that we have with him and Luke just makes kind of things that happen at the end like you deliver, like on every emotional note. And Mark Hamill is so sincere in his performance as Luke. I think that a lot of times, like heroes, I think someone said something one time and I corrected them, like, oh, it's so easy to care about the heroes, but an actor's really good when they play a villain. I kind of reject that on every principle because I feel like it's harder for someone to be a hero character because sometimes it's just, well, you're just going to pull this for this guy because he's a hero. You have to give us something to believe in, something to latch on to, someone to actually connect with. And on paper, Luke could be a great character, but if the actor doesn't bring it, it's not going to be there. But Mark Hamill does such an amazing job, and he has these lines, this Lucas dialogue that I'm sure is a challenge for anyone at the time, to whine about the Hitachi station, picking up power converters, stuff like that. But he does it so sincerely, and he does such a great job that you're on this journey with him beginning to end. And there's just something so pure about this movie. And to clarify, I actually watched my DVD copy um, of the original edition, despite the terrible aspect ratio that it's in. But I did want to watch the original, and like to echo your complaints, I, I I don't hate that the special editions exist, but I do wish that the original versions were available in high quality, in high definition, 4K, whatever the case may be, in good transfer for everyone to watch, but to have options. Um, because, some people might enjoy the special editions, DVD edition, Blu ray edition, whatever, the 3D edition, whatever it is, they might enjoy it. Um, and I have no problem with people enjoying it, but to rob people of the experience that is just the original version is kind of a tragedy because it's just so tight and so perfect. And Carrie Fisher is another like pure aspect of this movie. She's beautiful. Um, Princess Leia is just this pure, beautiful character, like the essence of royalty. But she's, you know, and I think like some people have tried to characterize her as not a strong female character, and I think it's very untrue. I think she's, very brave, and like despite the fact that they rescue her, she wasn't captured because she was a woman. She, like that whole ship at the beginning got captured by Vader, who we just saw in Rogue One is kind of a pretty unstoppable force. Um, I think anybody would have been, prisoner at some point, uh, whether it be, or Luke or Han or someone else on that ship. Uh, had been on that ship, it would have been the same thing. Um, but I think she's got a strong personality, as Carrie Fisher did. And so I think she very much put a little bit of herself into it, um, and injected an energy into that character that maybe another actress wouldn't have. And I think that's why Princess Leia has been such a popular character and over the years is because of her. And just like those aspects to this, uh, Harrison Ford, of course, is just awesome anyway. Lucas didn't really want him in it because he had, worked with him before on American Graffiti, Um, Ford had worked with some of his friends, worked with Coppola on the conversation. You know, you can go through a whole list of people that auditioned for Star Wars, and it's pretty humorous and pretty interesting. But one of the ones that tried out for Han was a Kurt Russell, which would have been an interesting development. But I think Harrison Ford was definitely the right choice because he's got this swagger to him and confidence, and it's not fake. It's very genuine, and it feels natural. And I think that is something only Harrison Ford can pull off, um, the way that he does. And I think that's perfect for the Han Solo character. I tear up in this movie, and maybe it's because of John Williams. I don't know. I don't know if it's just because of the music manipulating me, but I think it is a combination of the story doing what it does, the story playing out so beautifully, so perfectly, and the music just driving it home. Um, like every time Obi-Wan speaks to Luke in the Death Star run, I immediately tear up. And I listen to this score every now and then in my car. And when I get to this part, I tear up. But it's just such a beautifully told story that I don't want to get too carried away. But like, this is just like the ultimate movie. This is like the ultimate film experience because it throws you into this world. It takes you there, and you're immediately hook, line, and sinker brought in with that opening sequence. Well, just amazing, like that between the crawl and the Tantive Four being tracked by the Star Destroyer and the battle. It's just you're immediately right into the story. You're invested. You're going through, and I guess I need to talk about 3PO and R2D2 to kind of follow a Kurosawa influence, which Lucas did. The Hidden Fortress. Some people will say this is just a remake of Hidden Fortress. I think it's a little more than that. Uh, but the narrative device that he did kind of lift from that was to have like these side characters kind of be, your point of view characters. And I don't even really think that R2D2 and 3PO are the point of view characters for the whole movie. For the opening, for the first act, for sure. Um, but it was a clever way to kind of frame that and to have them introduce us to these other characters. And I do love both of these droids. 3PO is Anthony Daniels does a great job of just nailing that uh, kind of oblivious, uh, almost innocence to 3PO, and yet have that just absolute kind of smug attitude as well, or kind of snobby. Um, but Kenny Baker, um, may he rest in peace, did a great job as R2D2 as well, being in that contraption and having to deal with that in Tunisia and everywhere else they were. I can't imagine what it was like. But R2D2 is probably the best droid in the series, and he's almost like a dog. He's just such a loyal a loyal companion, and I love his relationship with Luke. And we actually said this to each other. We didn't we didn't say this on the podcast, but we failed to mention in Mandalorian that final episode of season 2 that it was a joy to see R2D2 back with Luke. Um, so that was our mistake. We're sorry, but I love R2D2, and I think it gets lost sometimes that he is a character. Um, I love like when he rescues, when they rescue them from the trash compactor. Um, it's just a great moment, and I love when R2 gets shot on, in the Death Star battle. It's emotional, and it kind of raises the stakes. Um, it's good that they repair him. Uh, I'm glad because R2 is great. I would hate to lose R2 in this from the get go. But no, A New Hope is just. If I had to lay out top 5 movies of all time of my personal favorites, it would be up there. Maybe it'd be interchangeable with the other two. I don't know. But right now, that's how I feel, and I've felt that way for the last several years. Uh, that I think A New Hope is my favorite of the original trilogy and of the whole series. It's just beautiful movie, and I think it's kind of, and maybe it's because of the special editions and that being the only thing available, that the movie has kind of developed this reputation now that it's not as, it was just good because that was 1977 and they hadn't seen anything like that before. That's the only thing that was good about it. Like, okay, that's a weird opinion, but all right. Uh, but it's almost like now there's this take where, like in the original trilogy, the only good one was Empire Strikes Back, and it's just a very strange opinion, and I don't understand it at all. Um, but no, this movie is amazing, far and away, and it, it, just go ahead and say it's A+ for me. And if I could throw another plus at it, I would. It is one of the best movies I've ever seen.
Well, not only is it a pure story, as you pointed out, and Lucas is a great storyteller, I think through and through, really. But this one just happens to be a very boiled down kind of story.
Yeah,
And at the same time, it is so uniquely him
right.
in terms of the way it's told. And yes, it borrows elements from here and there. Um, Kurosawa pretty heavily, and just from Joseph Campbell and from old serials and World War II aerial footage,
Right.
and like it just influences left and right. And worth mentioning that at one time Lucas was going to make Apocalypse Now, because there's that. You just put this in a time and place that Apocalypse Now isn't too long after Star Wars, and it could have been a totally different career arc for Lucas, and this would have just been one in a thread of time and place movies for him, and uh, kind of statements on war and focus on certain types of characters. And it's just unique. Lucas's viewpoint and how we have and have not gotten that over time, because he didn't direct more, but the Lucasfilm catalog in and of itself is unique. Movies that he's produced and worked on are spectacularly unique, and the things that, I've reviewed all of the Lucasfilm movies on my blog, and it was really cool to see um, some of the ones that I had not seen, uh, and I think Lucas has some very unique taste Uh, and A New Hope has this whole opening stretch that is kind of unusual, where you're spending so much time with R2D2 and C3PO, who are great characters, but if you remove your knowledge of who these characters are, and that they're not baked into the pop culture as they have been, it's quite a weird way to start a movie. It takes a minute before the movie like latches on to characters that you know are going to be a through line.
Right.
Before you settle into Luke and really get a sense of that narrative. But it's clever, and it's really establishing a mood and putting you into a place. Really feels like you're going to a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. It allows you to be put into a certain mood. It's definitely still well paced. The whole movie is well paced. Never lets up, but it's also in a way different than a lot of movies that imitate it today.
Right.
A lot of movies, the MCU being chief among them, as influenced by Star Wars. But few movies take the time to do what the first Star Wars movie does.
Right.
And doesn't feel the burden of over explaining either.
No.
I think that's an important aspect of it. It doesn't over explain the story or the characters, but you understand everything
Yeah.
as it goes. Like it feels like a lived in reality, and not just because everything's beaten down and torn up and stuff, but because like it feels like you're just dropped into a story.
Yeah.
And this is all just happening. And that's really credit to Lucas and crew. And of course to the actors, as you've referenced, like they're just so dynamic, so personality driven. That's a big part of the Star Wars success, obviously, too, especially that main trio of
Right.
Hamill, Fisher, and Ford. Like they are really a huge driving force for the personality of the movie, and that works spectacularly well. I want to pause for sidebar, I guess, on John Williams, because I listened to the soundtrack show, which I think I've mentioned to you before. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to check it out.
Yeah, I haven't checked it out, but you've told me about it. Yeah.
Podcast well worth listening to, and he did like the Star Wars movies, and he's actually tied to the guy that does that show. He's tied to the Star Wars franchise and stuff. But point is, he did a whole episode where he talked about not just Star Wars, but an episode talking about Dies Irae, which I don't know if I think we've talked about this too, but it's such a common theme that I think everybody knows it, but they probably don't know what it is offhand.
Right.
But the bum 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 bum, like the death march kind of tone, and it is everywhere in music, especially in film scores. And once you realize it's everywhere, it's like, holy crap, it is everywhere. And John Williams is such a smart composer. It's not just that he makes memorable themes, it's that he actually tells a story with his music.
Right.
And I just find that absolutely stunning when you break it down. And David W. Collins on the soundtrack show actually does that. It's incredible to like see music theory and storytelling all borne out in what John Williams does. It's so much more intricate than just having a fun theme. And that original Star Wars theme has the story of Star Wars baked into it.
Right.
The dun 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 bum 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 bum. And it's them like having an adventure and beating the Death Star.
Right.
So the Death March is right there in the Star Wars theme. Dun 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 dun. But in a way that's like almost like victorious. Like it uses the Death March and takes it. You're defeating the Death Star. And I just thought, what a cool thing that it's not just the Star Wars theme, but it's something that tells the story and obviously has become a part of all Star Wars content over time. But it all goes back to A New Hope and to that original story. And obviously, it's deeper than just that specific story. It's all about that sense of adventure and what all these narratives kind of have into them at some level, like the little guy defeating the Empire. That kind of narrative is all through a lot of Star Wars content. But uh, yeah, I mean, it's just funny how like you can always respect somebody like John Williams, but then the deeper you go, the more impressive it becomes.
Yeah.
And not to mention, like, there's also notes of like his Bernard Herrmann influence and being taught by Bernard Herrmann, and there's actually like Psycho references in Star Wars as well, which is just really cool little details that I'd never noticed before until I was like watching the soundtrack or listening to the soundtrack show, which obviously, as I'm mentioning it, I highly recommend anybody that might find that interesting to dig into the soundtrack show. And obviously, specifically Star Wars, but I enjoy that show all around. Uh, yeah, it's a big part, obviously, of the success of Star Wars all around. It's just what John Williams did from the very start, giving it life. But even without the music, it's not like the movie is a bad movie. Like on every level, the movie works and clicks,
Right.
and those effects, as I mentioned, are part and parcel of that as well. And it's just crazy impressive how they did that battle all around this Death Star and going through the trenches and
Yeah.
flying around and creating not just the visceral impact of seeing the action, but also how they created the excitement in it, all the way to actually nailing the shot, the Millennium Falcon coming into view.
Right.
That whole like stretch is just exhilarating. Like everything comes together. The emotionality of it, the performances, the character beats, everything just hinges right into this one moment. There are a few movies that I could think of that come anywhere close to the climax of this movie in terms of like everything congealing on a moment. Uh, Plenty of movies have effective climaxes, but few have that moment of like release and everything clicking into place right there with this explosion. You know, that really goes back again to the purity of the story.
Right.
It's not just great because of the action, it's great because we've grown to care about these characters and the stakes of the story and defeating the Empire and blah, 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 all right down to this moment. Just really effective, beautiful storytelling. And yes, it's an A+.
Yeah.
And I give it a B-. It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Another, influence that is very prevalent is, the planets, uh, especially like Mars, Bringer of War. That piece of music, you can hear a lot of moments from the battle, uh, influenced by that as well. But it's just incredible, the use of it, the the music. Like you said, it's a story unto itself. It really propels everything. I completely agree with what you said earlier about Peter Cushing. Uh, Everything from him being great and him being underrated in this movie, because yes, Vader, who we've barely touched on in this, uh, who I think is awesome in this. Don't get me wrong, because he is a great villain. I think um, a lot of that comes from this movie, kind of setting that up. That how awesome he is. It's not just the following films. A lot of it stems from this too. I love his role in the battle. I love the fact that that Luke and him don't have some kind of one-on-one confrontation in this movie. That it ends up being part of the aerial space battle, and really he kind of it's just by luck and Han's intervention that um, it turns out in Luke's favor. It's very scraping by. But to get back on Tarkin, I think he's very much kind of the main villain in this movie. And he's definitely in charge. And kind of, as Leia says, holding Vader's leash. And you see it in the sequels without Tarkin there to kind of hold him back. Vader will just kill anyone that disappoints him. Whereas in the meeting that I really enjoy this scene with all the Imperial officers where they're, talking about the Death Star, whether they should rely too much on it. And guy kind of goes off on Vader's religion of the Force and talks about him, and Vader starts choking him with the Force, does the Force choke, and um, Tarkin, all he has to do is just say release him. And for Vader to show someone respect like that, Tarkin's got to be pretty commendable, and pretty up there in terms of influence. I uh, I think the performance is great. I think Cushing, of course, being a Hammer horror icon, having played Van Helsing, everyone from Van Helsing to Professor Frankenstein in these movies, and the connection to Christopher Lee playing Dooku. They were actually best friends in real life, but also kind of pitted against each other in Hammer oftentimes, with Christopher Lee playing Dracula so many times in those movies. But the kind of key element to keeping a Hammer horror icon involved, but Cushing did so good in this, and David Prowse, who played Vader, kind of going back to Vader too, who played who was in the suit, the man in the suit, was also a Hammer horror um, icon, or had played Frankenstein's monster a time or two. David Prowse, and he recently passed away. Um, as well. And Peter Mayhew, Chewbacca, also recently passed away. A lot of people, of course, Carrie Fisher also recently, haven't in the last few years, recently passed away. And Peter Cushing, not very recently, passed away. You could name everybody. Alec Guinness, like a lot of the people in this film are no longer with us. Prowse has a very menacing uh, presence, but it's very good that they did not go with his voice, because it would have been very comically Scottish. And I love the footage they have, like in a couple of those documentaries of him delivering the lines, because it's so funny. It almost seems like it's out of Spaceballs.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a member of the Imperial Senate on a diplomatic mission.
You are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take her away.
But they got James Earl Jones to be the voice of Vader, and I think that was the ultimate choice. He did a perfect job. He, Vader's look, I'm definitely not going to discount it. It's very much part of what makes Vader Vader. But if you didn't have James Earl Jones doing the voice, I don't know if he would have been as memorable uh, a character. And there's just so many things that work about this movie. I could go on forever, but you know, this just truly is one of the best movie experiences, and it's just like that, like I said, that pure feeling. It's a simple story. I Don't get me wrong, I love the Star Wars lore, I love the larger universe, I love the further explorations of, the Force and the Jedi, and where we go from here in this trilogy. But just the simplicity of this story, and that what you see is all you need to understand it. There's just something really refreshing about that. And I think in my, getting a little older, I just really appreciate about it. And it's won me over the years, and is definitely my favorite of the entire series. And be interested to see if it stays that for until I until I am no longer with us, so to speak. But um, or if I'll end up liking another one of the trilogy more over time, because I really kind of view them equally. It's kind of a revolving door, but I've kind of landed on A New Hope for now. But Star Wars, just really one of the greatest movies of all time.
I'm going to mention too that back on, well, like watching the movie for this current run, which I've seen it approximately 2 billion times or something like. But like,
Yeah,
uh, right now you have this devil's choice of, especially depending on where you're watching in 4K, but the special edition version versus the last time it was officially released in the original theatrical cut on the DVD that you referenced, where it was treated like a special feature.
right.
Like, oh, if you want this, then here it is. It's letterboxed and in 2.0 sound, but there it is. You got it. Like, well, gee, thanks. I guess it's something. That was the last time the theatrical cut was officially released, and yeah, I had that debate, like, which one do I want to watch, the high quality version or the version that is the best version of the movie.
Right.
And it's not like the special edition is awful. It's not like it isn't a good movie. All of a sudden, it's still a good movie, and still mostly the same movie. But nonetheless, uh, watching them all in story order, like, it's one thing to pick it apart as like this pure experience as if it exists unto itself. But watching them in story order, I think it's weird how much Alec Guinness's performance seems to be living the prequels.
Hmm.
And obviously that's imagined to some degree. Alec Guinness was an incredible actor, so I'm sure he was legitimately working through stuff in his mind, like working through the past. It just wasn't literally the past that we now have created in stories.
Right.
But he was definitely doing something, uh, working through the history of him and Anakin, whatever he imagined that being. But it's easy to like picture him actually thinking about the stories that we've seen. And one of the coolest things, though, is whenever he uh, is about to be killed, what's the last thing that he sees? Luke and Leia back together.
Right.
And that's just so neat. Like, that's him finding peace right there in that moment. Like, Luke and Leia are back together. And imagining that story playing out, you know, what he was able to bring together, the weight of that. And obviously, none of that was known to people at the time making it.
Right.
But thinking about it now in terms of the shape of the story, that's really neat to see developed out like that. Jumping especially from 3 to 4, even ignoring Rogue One, you just jump from the birth of Luke and Leia, and now seeing them here in Obi-Wan's essentially brought them together, or the Forces brought them together. However you want to look at that in terms of the mysticism, which is relatively light in A New Hope.
Yeah.
The sense of the mystical, it's definitely present, but it's almost more in the background than it is fully lived out. But that will change in the very next chapter. The degree to which the Force is developed and given a sense of as a mystical force, which is kind of the inevitability of a sequel, to develop out the world, and then the question of how well do you execute that. And the next episode will be episodes 5 and 6, Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Our only episode in this run that's exclusively original trilogy.
Right.
And a double feature that I've experienced multiple times.
Yeah.
Even in a theatrical environment, I got to watch Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi back in 2002 at Celebration 2 in Indianapolis, which was a huge amount of fun to watch that with an audience. But as a random aside, and I'm sorry to go back in time like this, just real quick to Rogue One, where I saw it, like I said, at opening night, but I saw it with my girlfriend, who is not, like, she enjoys Star Wars, but she's not, like, she likes watching things once and not watching them over again, and is not like some avid Star Wars fan digging into the lore. So all she knew is new Star Wars movie, and I try not to, like, be the annoying boyfriend, like, giving her, like, all the details. Like, let me give you the backstory to everybody and to what's happening. Try not to go overboard. But what I didn't realize is she thought that Rogue One was the sequel to Force Awakens.
Right.
When we were going to it. And then at the very beginning of the movie, she's like, oh, look, yeah, they're establishing her parentage. Because that was one of the mysteries in Force Awakens, was Rey and, like, who her parents were. There's a little question there about where her family was and how she got where she is. So she thought, oh, look, they're going back in time. And now it's to continue, like, wait, what? Darth Vader?
Right.
Death Star? What is happening? So yeah, she was very confused. And obviously figured it out to some degree, but was still like uncertain about where this fit in the scheme of all the Star Wars movies that she'd only seen, once. And I just found that really amusing. I've definitely not seen them just once.
Right.
And especially this original trilogy. So many times, like, all growing up. There's no telling how many times I've seen them. And when I said I was going to watch them so we could talk about them in a review, she said, do you really need to watch them again? I'm like, well, I guess not, but not technically in terms of knowing what I feel about them.
Right.
About the original trilogy specifically, but nonetheless, I think it's good to watch them, obviously, fresh before we talk about them on the show. And it was fun revisiting A New Hope again for this episode.
Definitely.
I only wish I had a little bit more time and I was able to watch both versions of it before we did it. That's just being extra picky about time. But nonetheless, looking forward to our next episode, my friend.
Yes, very much so.
Empire and Jedi.
Taking one step into a larger world.
Yes, indeed. I'll see you on the flip, my friend. May the force be with you.
And you as well.
See you all next time on Movie Marathon Mood.